Be me, Clarissa, founder and CEO of my own marketing startup, Equivat. Not just a company, but a movement, my life's work. The whole idea was to build a business that proved you could be successful without the old world corporate baggage. No backstabbing, no burnout culture, none of that chest-thumping nonsense you see everywhere else. I wanted to create a space where empathy and collaboration were the main drivers, not just profit margins. We were actually doing well for a while. Really well. We had a solid roster of clients and a reputation for getting things done. But the office culture, it just felt wrong. It wasn't what I envisioned. The core of my team was made up of 3 guys, Mark, David, and Kevin. On paper, they were perfect, the engine that made the company run. Mark was my lead project manager. The guy was a machine when it came to organization. He could juggle 10 projects at once and never miss a deadline. Clients loved him because he was direct and never promised something he couldn't deliver. But his energy was just aggressive. Everything was a fight to be won. We'd be in a meeting, and I'd be trying to talk about the long-term vision for a client's brand, and he'd cut in with questions about budget allocation and resource management. He called it being pragmatic. I called it stifling creativity with negativity. Every conversation with him felt like a negotiation, where I had to defend my ideals. Then there was David, our tech guy. He was one of those quiet genius types who basically built and maintained our entire digital infrastructure by himself. The man was a wizard. If a client's website had a problem, he'd fix it before the client even finished writing the email. The issue was, he was completely silent, a ghost in the machine. He never spoke in meetings unless you asked him a direct question, and even then, he'd give a one-word answer. I tried to get everyone to participate in team-building exercises, morning check-ins, things to foster a sense of community. David would just sit there, looking at his laptop, completely disengaged. It made people uncomfortable. He wasn't a team player. His silence felt like a judgment on all of us. I needed people who would contribute to the atmosphere, not just sit in the corner and code. And finally, there was Kevin, our lead designer. The guy was talented, I'll give him that. He could whip up a campaign visual that was clean, professional, and exactly what the client asked for. But it was always so safe, so predictable. I'd push him to be more bold, to challenge norms with his designs. He'd listen, nod, and then produce another perfectly effective, perfectly boring ad. The worst part was the bro culture between the 3 of them. They had their own private jokes, their own way of talking about projects that felt exclusionary. I'd walk into the main office space and they'd be laughing about something, and then immediately get quiet when they saw me. Mark and Kevin would talk about sports or some new action movie, and it just drained the intellectual energy from the room. I felt like an outsider in my own company. The whole point of Equivate was to be different, and here I was running an office that felt like any other soulless tech company run by men. I tried to steer things in the right direction. I organized mandatory workshops on mindful communication. I replaced the generic coffee with ethically sourced, single-origin beans, and put up posters with inspirational quotes from female leaders. I suggested a book club to read and discuss modern feminist literature. They participated, but it was all surface level. I could tell their hearts weren't in it. They saw it as a distraction from the real work. The breaking point came a few months ago. We had just landed our biggest client ever, a major tech firm I'll call Tech Corp. It was a massive company-defining project, a full-scale digital marketing overhaul. The deadline was tight and the pressure was on. Everyone was working long hours. The stress was palpable. I saw this as the perfect opportunity to implement a new policy I'd been thinking about. I called a big meeting with the whole team. I stood at the front of the conference room and laid out my grand vision. I told them that in the face of this immense pressure, we needed to prioritize our well-being. So, 2 weeks before the final Tech Corp deadline, we were going to have a mandatory week of mental wellness. Reduced work hours, no internal meetings, guided meditation sessions in the mornings, and a no questions asked policy for taking mental health breaks. I explained that a refreshed, happy team would be more productive and creative in the final stretch. I finished my speech feeling proud. I was being the change I wanted to see in the world. The room was silent for a moment. Then Mark cleared his throat. He wasn't looking at me, but at the project timeline projected on the wall. He calmly stated that the idea was nice in theory, but completely impossible in practice. He pointed to several key milestones on the timeline that were scheduled for that exact week. He explained that pushing them back would create a domino effect, making it mathematically impossible to meet the final deadline. He said we'd be in breach of contract with Tech Corp, which would not only cost us the project, but also incur significant financial penalties. He finished by saying, "We just can't do it, Clarissa. The numbers don't work." I stared at him. The way he said "the numbers" felt like a personal attack. He was reducing my vision for a healthier workplace to a simple math problem. He was using his cold male logic to shut down a conversation about human emotion and well-being. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but nodded in agreement with Mark. David, of course, said nothing, but he had his laptop open to a spreadsheet that seemed to confirm Mark's analysis. I saw it all so clearly in that moment. This was the wall I was always hitting. This was the toxic, results at all costs mentality I had built my company to fight against. They didn't get it. They would never get it. They were a part of the problem. I felt this wave of anger and disappointment wash over me. I ended the meeting abruptly. I went back to my office and sat there for an hour, just thinking. My dream of Equivade was dying. It was being suffocated by the very people I was paying to help build it. And I realized I had a choice. I could either compromise my values and let my company become another cog in the patriarchal machine, or I could make a radical change. I knew what I had to do. It was time to cleanse the temple. The next day I came in early. I prepared their severance packages, just the bare minimum required by law. I called them into my office one by one. Mark was first. He walked in, probably expecting a follow-up debate about the wellness week. I just handed him the envelope and told him his position was being eliminated, effective immediately. He was completely blindsided. He just stared at me, then at the envelope. He didn't yell or argue. He just got this cold, hard look in his eyes. He asked for a reason. I gave him some corporate HR speak about restructuring the company to better align with our core values. He just nodded slowly, stood up, and walked out without another word. Kevin was next. He was more visibly shocked. He kept saying, "But why? I thought everything was going great." I explained that we were moving in a different creative direction. He looked genuinely hurt, which was almost worse. He tried to talk about the projects he was in the middle of, but I just told him they would be reassigned. Finally, I called in David. I half expected him not to show up, but he did. He took the envelope, looked at it, and just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and left. No questions, no emotion. Just gone. It was done. I walked out of my office. The main workspace was eerily quiet. 3 empty desks. I felt a moment of panic. What have I done? But I pushed it down. This wasn't a loss. This was a new beginning. I had cut out the rot. Now I could finally build the team I always wanted. A team based on shared values, mutual support, and a truly progressive vision. That evening, I posted a job listing. I didn't post it on the usual job sites. I shared it in private online communities for female entrepreneurs and progressive activists. The job title was Creative Visionary Intern. I wasn't looking for experience. I was looking for passion. The description didn't list technical skills. It talked about changing the world, dismantling traditional power structures, and creating a safe and collaborative space. It was an unpaid internship, but I framed it as a mentorship opportunity with the chance to earn invaluable experience. The applications flooded in. They were all from young, bright, idealistic women. I spent the next few days interviewing them. It was so refreshing. Instead of talking about their past job performance, we talked about their ideas, their feelings, their vision for a better world. I finally settled on 3 of them. The leader of the group was Zoe. She was smart, articulate, and incredibly passionate. She spoke my language. She used all the right words. She talked about intersectionality, emotional labor, and the importance of challenging the status quo. She didn't have any real marketing experience, but I knew she was a star. She just got it. The other 2 interns were her friends, just as bright and eager. They started the following Monday. The vibe in the office changed overnight. It was like a cloud had lifted. There was laughter. There was music. We replaced the sterile office decor with plants and colorful art. Our morning meetings were no longer about project updates. They were about sharing our feelings, our inspirations, our struggles. We started a company blog and a new Instagram strategy. Zoe was a natural at it. She wrote these incredible, thought-provoking posts about the problems with modern advertising and the need for a feminist approach to marketing. We weren't just selling a service anymore. We were selling an idea. For the first few weeks, it was perfect. It was a utopia. I felt so validated. I had been right all along. This was how a company was supposed to feel. The actual client work seemed less important. We were still handling the smaller accounts, mostly just basic social media management and content creation. The quality wasn't quite what it used to be, but the energy was so much better. I figured the skills would come with time. The passion was the important part. The first sign of trouble came from one of our oldest, smallest clients, a local bakery. They sent an email complaining that their online engagement had plummeted since the new team took over. They said the posts were confusing and the images were low quality. I brought it up with Zoe. I showed her the email, expecting her to be concerned. She just shrugged. She told me the bakery owner just didn't understand our new, more advanced strategy. She said that focusing on metrics like likes and shares was a patriarchal way of measuring value. What really mattered, she explained, was that we were starting a conversation. Her confidence was so absolute that I found myself agreeing with her. She was right. The old ways were the problem. The client was the one who needed to adapt, not us. I sent a polite email back to the bakery, explaining our new holistic and narrative-driven approach. They canceled their contract the next day. I was a little annoyed, but I brushed it off. They were a small client anyway. They were holding us back, their loss. We were destined for bigger things. And the biggest thing of all was still on the horizon, the TechCorp project. After the firings, I had managed to get them to agree to a short extension on the deadline, blaming internal restructuring. I told them we had a new dynamic team in place and that the results would be better than ever. They were skeptical, but they agreed. Now that new deadline was looming, and the real work had to begin. It started with a simple request from the TechCorp marketing lead. They needed some urgent updates made to the project's staging website, which was hosted on our servers. It was a technical task, the kind of thing David would have handled in 5 minutes without even being asked. I didn't know the first thing about web servers or back-end code. I handed the request over to my new team. I told them it was a great learning opportunity. Zoe read the email from TechCorp and scoffed. She said the technical language they used was deliberately exclusionary and gatekeeping. Still, she said they would handle it. An hour later, I got a frantic call from the TechCorp lead. The entire staging website was down. Not just the page they wanted to update, the whole thing. It was showing a fatal error message. I ran out of my office to the main workspace. The 3 interns were huddled around a single monitor, looking terrified. I asked them what happened. They started talking all at once, blaming each other, blaming the system. One of them said she was just trying to change some text, and the whole thing crashed. Zoe stepped forward, taking charge. She declared that the problem wasn't their fault. The code that David had written was clearly the issue. It was overly complex and fragile. She said it was probably a form of professional sabotage on his part. He had left behind a system that was designed to fail without him. It made a twisted kind of sense. It was exactly the sort of passive-aggressive thing he would do. But that didn't solve the immediate problem. We had a multi-million-dollar client whose project site was completely offline because of us. I told them to fix it. They just stared at me blankly. They didn't know how. They had no idea where to even start. That was the first time I felt a real cold spike of fear. I spent the entire rest of the day and most of the night on the phone with the hosting company's tech support. I was trying to explain a problem I didn't understand to a support agent who was losing patience with me. I was Googling error messages, trying to decipher forum posts written in a language that might as well have been alien. The interns offered moral support for a while, telling me to be kind to myself during this stressful time. Then they left at 5 p.m. sharp, saying it was important to maintain a healthy work-life balance. By 3 a.m., sitting alone in the dark office, I finally managed to get the site back online. I had just randomly restored a backup from the previous day. I had no idea if I had lost any data. I just knew the error message was gone. I sent a shaky email to TechCorp, telling them the issue was resolved. I had survived, but something had been broken. The The perfect utopian illusion of my new office was starting to crack, and the worst was yet to come. I came into the office the next morning on about 2 hours of sleep. My eyes felt like sandpaper, and my head was pounding from the cheap coffee I'd been chugging all night. The office was bright and cheerful. The interns were already there, chatting and sipping herbal tea. They had put a vase of fresh flowers on my desk. Zoe greeted me with a serene smile. She told me how proud she was of me for navigating a stressful situation with such resilience. She handed me a document she had prepared. It was a post-mortem analysis of the systemic failure. I scanned it. It was 2 pages of dense academic text about hostile digital architecture and the inherent biases in legacy code. The conclusion was that David had intentionally created a system that was impossible for anyone but him to manage, a classic example of knowledge hoarding as a form of patriarchal gatekeeping. There was no mention of their own mistake, not a single word of accountability. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the document in half, but I was too tired to fight. I just mumbled a thank you and went into my office, closing the door. I had just put my head in my hands when an email from Tech Corp popped up. It was from the marketing lead. His tone was clipped and professional, but I could feel the ice underneath. He acknowledged that the site was back up. Then he moved on. The next phase of the project was creative. They needed a full suite of digital banner ads for their upcoming product launch. The email was very specific. It listed the exact dimensions, the key messaging points, and the target demographics. It was a straightforward bread-and-butter marketing task, the kind of thing Kevin used to be able to turn around in a single afternoon. This was our chance to recover, a chance to prove that the website crash was just a fluke. I printed out the email and walked out to the main office. I tried to sound upbeat and motivational. I told the team that this was our opportunity to really shine, to show Tech Corp our creative vision. I handed the brief to Zoe. She read it over, and her expression soured. She pointed to a line in the email. The messaging needs to emphasize the product's superior speed and power. Zoe looked at me, her eyes full of disappointment. She said that focusing on power and domination was a tired and toxic trope. She explained that our campaign shouldn't be about selling a product, but about telling a story. We needed to subvert their expectations and give them something that would make people think. The other 2 interns nodded enthusiastically. One of them suggested we do a campaign that questions the very nature of speed in a hyper-capitalist society. A part of my brain, the logical part that I had been trying to suppress, was screaming at me. It was telling me to just tell them to do what the client asked for, but I couldn't. I had built this whole new culture around trusting their vision. If I shut them down now, I would be a hypocrite. I took a deep breath and said, "Okay, I trust you. Show me what you've got." It was a colossal mistake. They spent the next 2 days ideating and workshopping. The office was a mess of mood boards, sticky notes, and magazine clippings. They seemed to be having a great time. There was a lot of laughing and creative energy. I tried to check in on their progress, but they told me I was disrupting their flow state and that I needed to trust the process. The day the assets were due, they called me over for the big reveal. They had the designs up on the main monitor. I just stared. There were no product images. There was no clear branding. The banner ads were a series of abstract watercolor paintings. One was a blurry image of a bird in flight. Another was a close-up of a single drop of water hitting a pond. Overlaid on the images were cryptic, philosophical questions. Where are we all rushing to? Can you measure a moment? Equivate Marketing was written in a tiny font at the bottom. The client's name, Tech Corp, was nowhere to be seen. I asked Zoe where the actual product was. She gave me a patient smile, as if explaining something to a child. "The product isn't the point," she said. "The feeling is the point. We're not selling a piece of hardware. We're selling a moment of quiet contemplation in a chaotic world." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a marketing campaign. This was an art school project. I told them, my voice trembling slightly, that Tech Corp would never approve this. That we needed to start over, right now, and just do what they asked. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The smiles vanished. Zoe crossed her arms. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Clarissa," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We thought you valued creative courage." Another intern added that my reaction was stifling their artistic expression. I felt like I was losing my mind. But we were out of time. I told them to just package up what they had and send it over. I would deal with the fallout. We sent the files to Tech Corp. The response came less than an hour later. It was from a new person on the email chain, the chief marketing officer of Tech Corp. The email was short. This is completely unacceptable. It fails to meet every single requirement of the brief. It is amateurish and unprofessional. You have 48 hours to deliver commercially viable assets, or we will be forced to reevaluate our contract with your agency. I read the email 3 times. My hands were shaking. This was it, the final warning. I walked out of my office holding my laptop. I went straight to Zoe's desk. I didn't yell. My voice was dangerously quiet. I put the laptop down in front of her, the CMO's email glowing on the screen. "Read this," I said. She read it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Now," I said, "you are going to fix this. All of you. You are not going home until we have a new campaign that a normal human being would actually understand." I opened up our old project files. I found one of the last campaigns Kevin had designed. It was clean, corporate, and effective. A picture of the product, a clear headline, and a Learn More button. "This," I said, pointing to the screen. "Make it look like this. I don't want your art. I don't want your philosophy. I want a boring ad that sells a product." Zoe looked at the screen, then back at me. Her expression had changed from fear to indignation. "You want us to copy his work?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "You want us to replicate the most basic, uninspired, masculine form of advertising?" "Yes," I said through gritted teeth. "That's exactly what I want." "This is an incredibly hostile environment," one of the other interns whispered. Zoe stood up. "We can't work like this," she announced. "You're using pressure and aggression to force us into a creative box. This goes against everything Equivate is supposed to stand for." I just snapped. "I don't care about what Equivate is supposed to stand for right now," I heard myself shouting. "I care about the multi-million-dollar client we are about to lose because you guys can't follow simple instructions." The moment the words were out of my mouth, I felt a horrible sense of déjà vu. The way I was standing, the tone of my voice, the desperate focus on money and results. I sounded just like Mark. The interns were looking at me as if I had grown a second head. They looked genuinely scared. But it wasn't fear of me. It was a look of righteous, wounded certainty. I was the monster. Zoe took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "We need to have a meeting," she said. "The 3 of us need to talk to you about the toxic work environment you've created." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was the one working 20-hour days to clean up their messes. I was the one on the receiving end of furious emails from our biggest client. And they wanted to lecture me about the toxic environment? They scheduled the meeting for the following morning. They insisted. They said it was necessary to clear the air before any productive work could continue. I was so stunned, I just agreed. The rest of the day was a blur. They made a half-hearted attempt to work on the new ads, but they were mostly whispering to each other, casting worried glances in my direction. They left at 5 p.m. on the dot, as usual. I stayed. I sat at Kevin's old desk, staring at his design software. I tried to use it myself. I tried to drag and drop images, to create the simple, clean ads that Tech Corp wanted, but it was useless. I didn't know the shortcuts, the tools, the techniques. Everything I made looked clumsy and ugly, like a ransom note. The professional-grade software felt like an instrument I didn't know how to play. An hour turned into 2, then 4. I was getting nowhere. The 48-hour deadline was ticking down. I was completely, utterly alone. My team, my hand-picked team of visionaries, had abandoned me. Worse, they had turned on me. They had taken the very values I had instilled in them, and were now using them as a weapon against me. I looked around the empty office, at the inspirational posters and the dying plants. The vibrant, happy utopia I had built felt like a prison. And I was the only inmate. I had a meeting in the morning where I was going to be reprimanded by my own interns. After that, I had less than 24 hours to somehow produce a professional quality advertising campaign from scratch by myself. For the first time, I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like a fraud. I put my head down on the desk, surrounded by the ghost of a competent man's workstation, and wanted to cry. But I was too tired for that too. The blinking cursor on the blank screen just mocked me in the dark. I must have fallen asleep at the desk. I woke up to the feeling of the morning sun hitting my face through the office window. My neck was stiff and my back ached. The computer screen was still on, displaying my pathetic attempt at a banner ad. The interns arrived shortly after, looking fresh and rested. They didn't greet me. They walked past my desk and went straight to the conference room, closing the door behind them. A few minutes later, Zoe came out. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "We're ready for you," she said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. I felt a surge of defiance. I was the CEO. I owned this company. I didn't have to do this, but I was too exhausted to fight. I just wanted it to be over. I walked into the conference room and sat down. They were all sitting on one side of the table, a united front. They had a notepad in front of them with a list of bullet points. It felt like a tribunal. Zoe acted as the spokesperson. She started by saying that they were all deeply concerned about the direction the company was heading. She said my behavior the previous day was problematic and created an unsafe space for creative expression. One of the other interns chimed in, saying my fixation on the client's demands over the team's well-being was a classic example of late-stage capitalism's dehumanizing influence. They told me I had been using aggressive language and imposing unrealistic expectations. I just sat there, listening. It felt surreal, like I was watching a scene from a terrible movie. I looked at their faces. They were so earnest, so convinced of their own righteousness. They genuinely believed they were the victims here. Zoe then slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list of their demands. They wanted a formal apology from me, both written and verbal. They wanted a new policy implemented that would give them full creative autonomy on all projects, free from client-driven micromanagement. They wanted a reduction in working hours and the introduction of a 4-day work week, effective immediately to prevent burnout. And the final point, they wanted to transition from unpaid interns to salaried, co-directing partners in the company. I read the list and something inside me just broke. It was the sheer breathtaking audacity of it all. We were hours away from losing our only major client. The company was on the verge of financial ruin, and they were demanding a promotion. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, hollow, exhausted sound. I couldn't stop. I just sat there, laughing at the absurdity of my situation. My laughter seemed to unnerve them. They exchanged confused, worried glances. When I finally stopped, I took a deep breath. I looked at Zoe. "Get out," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Get out," I repeated, my voice flat and empty. "All of you, pack your things. You're done here. The internship is over." For a moment, they were too shocked to speak. Then the outrage came. Zoe stood up, her face red with anger. "You can't do that," she sputtered. "You can't just fire us for speaking up. This is retaliation." "You're unpaid interns," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "There's nothing to fire you from. Your mentorship opportunity has concluded. Now, please leave my office." They started shouting about their rights, about how they were going to expose me and my exploitative practices on social media. I didn't care anymore. I just pointed to the door. It took them another 10 minutes of threats and dramatic pronouncements, but eventually they were gone. I was alone again in the silent office. The deadline for the Tech Corp assets was in about 6 hours. I knew it was hopeless. I couldn't do it. I had failed. I had taken a successful, growing company and driven it straight into the ground in a matter of months. I had done it to myself. I had chosen ideology over competence, and this was the result. Sitting at my desk, I pulled up the company's financials. It was even worse than I thought. The penalty for breaching the Tech Corp contract would wipe out almost all of our remaining cash reserves. Equivate was finished. Then, a different kind of thought entered my mind, a desperate last-ditch Hail Mary. My fingers moved on their own, opening my old contact list. My thumb hovered over a name I hadn't looked at in months. Mark. What was I even thinking? He would laugh in my face. He would hang up on me. But what other choice did I have? I took a deep, shaky breath and hit the call button. It rang 3 times. I was about to hang up when he answered. "Hello?" His voice was calm, professional, unfamiliar. "Mark," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. It's Clarissa." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Clarissa," he said finally. His tone was impossible to read, not angry, not friendly, just neutral. I started talking, the words tumbling out of me in a desperate rush. I didn't make excuses. I didn't blame the interns. I just laid it all out. I told him about the Tech Corp deadline, the website, the banner ads. I told him I was in over my head and that the company was about to go under. I told him I knew it was a long shot. I knew I had no right to ask, but I was desperate. "I'll pay you anything," I pleaded. "A consulting fee, double your old rate, triple it, just for a few hours, just to help me get through this one deadline." When I finished, the line was silent again. I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me off, to tell me I deserved this. When he finally spoke, his voice was still perfectly level. "I appreciate the offer, Clarissa," he said, "but I can't help you." My heart sank. "I understand," I mumbled. "I'm sorry to have bothered you." "It's not that I wouldn't," he continued, and for the first time, I heard a hint of something else in his voice. Not pity, but something like finality. "Kevin, David, and I just accepted an offer from your main competitor. They hired us as a package deal to run their new digital marketing division." I couldn't breathe. "Our first assignment," he went on, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather, "is to take over the Tech Corp account. Their CMO called us directly this morning. It seems they've just terminated their contract with you." The world tilted on its axis. He knew. He already knew. "I wish you the best of luck with your company," he said. Then he hung up. I lowered the phone from my ear. I sat there in my empty, silent office, staring at the screen of my computer. On it was a half-finished poster Zoe had been working on before she left. It had a picture of a shattered glass ceiling, and underneath, in bold, cheerful letters, it read, "The future is female." I looked at that poster. Then I looked at the wreckage of my company, my dream. I had fired my best people because they didn't fit my vision. I had replaced them with people who shared my vision but had no skills. And in the end, the competent professional men I had cast aside hadn't been destroyed. They had moved on. They had been rewarded for their skills. I was the one who was left with nothing. I had become the architect of my own destruction. I finally understood. It wasn't about being male or female. It wasn't about vision or values or creating a safe space. It was about competence. It was about being able to do the job. And I had chased away the only people who could. Sitting there, in the ruins of my perfect progressive company, I finally regretted it. Not just losing the money, but being so wrong, so blindly, arrogantly wrong.